Thank you, thank you so much for allowing me to come here today. It's a real pleasure to share with you folks an issue that is close to my heart. I'm a bee, and so that's what we'll be talking about right now. And our populations have been in decline for the last decade, and there's many cumulative factors that are playing a role in our population decline. The usual culprits: habitat fragmentation and loss, climate change, disease, and pesticide use. So I just want to share with you first some of the ecosystem services that we provide for free. So enjoy. Well, without bees like me, the dinner plate would be pretty boring. Actually, half of the commercial bees live on flatbed trucks and are shipped around the country. And they start usually in California with the almond crops. And then they move up to the northwest and pollinate apples. And then they go to the Midwest, do some work there, and then they return back to California. And it's on these flatbed trucks that we were able to notice in 2006 colony collapse disorder. And that alerted the public to the plight of the bees. And in fact, since 1945, about half of the population has disappeared. That's a large drop in population. There are four major factors impacting populations of bees, and they are monocrops, disease and pests, climate change, and pesticides. Monocrops create food deserts because once the flowers are done blooming, there's no food for the bees. Here's a picture of a blood-sucking mite, and this has a huge impact on bee mortality, as you can imagine. Climate change is also a big factor because it causes plants to flower earlier than the bees historically wake up. Pesticides can kill or severely limit brain and motor function in bees. Studies suggest that pesticides are having an adverse impact on their populations. And there's been a lot of hype in the news about pesticides and the correlation of bee population decline. And so let's have a look at what the hype is all about. All right, enjoy.
They are, according to some scientists, the single most important insect to humans.
The health of bees and the impacts of climate change.
A massive decline in bee populations. In the past 3 years, colonies have disappeared by an alarming 35%.
Over the last 5 years, it's estimated the bee population has declined by more than 30%.
Beekeepers reported losing roughly 40% of their honeybee colonies.
A recent U.S. Department of Agriculture report warns the survivorship of honeybee colonies is too low for us to be confident in our ability to meet the pollination demands of U.S. crops. No one knows for sure what's causing it, but there's plenty of suspects: parasitic mites, bacterial disease. But more and more suspicion is landing on pesticides, specifically neonicotinoids.
The new papers demonstrated the popular insecticide used in agriculture called neonicotinoids can be harmful to bees.
Researchers at York University in Ontario did a second test in the laboratory mimicking what they found in the field. They exposed bees to a small amount of the neonicotinoid-infused pollen, and those bees stopped, get this, maintaining the hygiene of their hive. Typically, bees will remove sick or dead bees, but the insecticide-exposed bees, for some reason, stopped doing this, leaving sick bees inside the hive.
What we found in our study was that worker bees from exposed colonies died 23% sooner. So that's a very big hit to the colony. They also had abnormal foraging behaviors. We found also that the colonies had a difficulty replacing a queen. So over time, we had more and more queenless colonies, which, unless there is an intervention, the colonies will perish.
Bees, by pollinating a variety of fruit, nut, and vegetable crops, are responsible for 1/3 of the human diet. According to the U.S. government, bees add more than $15 billion in annual value to food crops.
The first photo you're looking at here shows more than 450 products sold in their store. The second photo, well, the store removed produce that originates from plants reliant on pollinators.
All right, let's have a talk with somebody who is involved with bees in Calgary. And Lise Watson is the founder of ABC Bees. And she has a passion for honeybees and is focused on educating the public on hive management and urban stewardship for native bees. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us via Skype. We've been here discussing the plight of bee populations, and we were hoping to get a human perspective on what's killing the bees. So what do you think some of the major factors contributing to bee decline are?
Native bees have been dealing with a real challenge with the decrease of habitat due to urbanization, as well predominantly because of agricultural practices. So we see massive monocrops being spread out, whether it's cereal grains or whether it has to do with things like soy, corn, or canola, or other gigantic monocrops that allow only either one nectar source for a short period of time or no nectar source at all. And then the other challenge for them has to do with habitat destruction. So a lot of native bees are actually ground nesting bees, bumblebees predominantly, as well as mason bees and carder bees, leaf cutter bees. They can all be very much ground nesting. So with high intensity farming, there's a little space for them to actually successfully nest. So habitat destruction is a leading cause of bee losses or decline in Canada and around the world.
How important are native bees to population and food security, do you think?
Not having native pollinators is a severe concern, but native bees do offer an incredible amount for us as far as production goes. I mean, honeybees do not pollinate tomatoes. So we're really dependent on them.
How would you describe bee-human relations at this point in time in North America?
Human behavior and activity around bees in general are a necessity to have them for pollination, but then are also mismanagement of them is causing kind of potential risks and challenges for those bees.
What's your opinion on the impact of pesticides on bee populations?
There is more than substantial scientific evidence proving that current legal pesticide use across Canada has a direct correlation and effect on the declining pollinator populations.
Any suggestions on what humans can do to ensure bee populations thrive?
I mean, what everyone as individuals can do is super important. So whether it's, digging out dandelions instead of spraying them, whether it's using an ecological strategy when it comes to pesticides in your environment rather than using a chemical strategy, There's a lot of new products on the line that allow people to still keep a pretty pristine horticultural environment, even in an urban setting, that is more, ecologically minded.
Thank you. Thank you so much. The overarching problem facing bees is habitat loss, for sure, as Elise so eloquently stated. But it also appears to be a design issue. The average bee can only travel about 30 meters for a food source. So we're going to use these 30-meter diameter circles to illustrate the food deserts and lack of bee habitat in a couple of different regions of the globe here. Here's Manhattan, quite stark. Downtown Vancouver is very similar. The suburbs have more flower options, but the farmland is another desert, with a bee not being able to fly across different crops by the looks of it. One option, much like wildlife corridors, is pollinator corridors, where flowers are planted along parking lots, boulevards, and alongside roadways, adjacent to buildings, on buildings, in parking lots. These areas need to be vegetated, so instead of grass, how about bee food? There's no cattle grazing, right? Alright, let's have a look at the James Bay Pollinator Garden, an urban experiment in pollinator corridors and having plants and flowers, year-round for bees to live in and eat from. And they also have bees on site. Enjoy! Well, we've learned a lot about bees and the factors contributing to their decline today. So let's review and synthesize the material we have viewed today. First, we learned the importance of bees, pollination, and food production. We also learned about native bees and honeybees and the factors contributing to their decline. We also learned that because of habitat loss due to urbanization and agricultural practices, humans are going to have to create more space for bees. Being thoughtful about bee habitat and planting native plants to foster that relationship. For example, bee condos on your balcony. Finally, pesticide practices have to be altered. Some chemicals should be stopped immediately, in fact. And this is a real killer, and we all know what's happening. So let's get on it. And to end today, I'd like to visit a site of urban bee stewardship in action. Enjoy. Let's go visit the Welland Legacy Orchard, where they're cleaning out bee condos and destroying mites to ensure native bees have a fighting chance next spring. All right, enjoy.
use a propane torch. It's just a handheld propane torch. And just go over them, scorch them.
And that's to kill mites.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. I do it before I take the bees out. No, I do it after.